Answers to media questions. Question: This week, the European Parliament encouraged the EU authorities to seize Russia's sovereign assets. How would you comment on this most recent call for an actual theft of Russian money? Maria Zakharova: We have repeatedly commented on such actions by Western countries. The United States and its satellites have long had thieving intentions with regard to Russian gold and foreign exchange reserves, which they blocked in 2022. Ever since, the West has been inventing ways to appropriate the Bank of Russia assets in order to subsequently channel them to help the Kiev regime, primarily to pay for military supplies, therefore, for the murder of Ukrainian citizens. We would like to emphasize once again that the move to freeze Russian assets in Western jurisdictions, as well as the attempts to seize them, are illegal actions that grossly violate the fundamental principles and norms of international law, including the principle of sovereign equality of states and the UN Charter. We regard any encroachment on Russia's property rights and interests as little short of theft, undisguised and cynical, and aimed at lining the perpetrator's own pockets. Such actions are fraught with escalation of economic aggression and are definitely part of hybrid warfare against Russia. If the Russian central bank assets are eventually seized, stolen, we will be guided by the principle of reciprocity. In this case, a tit-for-tat symmetrical retaliatory action will be in order. This principle applies in international relations and provides for an inalienable right to retaliate. The European Parliament has probably forgotten that there is a significant amount of Western funds and property under Russian jurisdiction that can be accessed. Why doesn't the European Parliament hold a referendum, or find another way of asking the citizens of the member countries what they think of it? They can hold an opinion poll or a referendum, or also invite business representatives who have various types of assets in our country for consultation. But they aren't doing this because they know what citizens will tell them. We will not try to be polite or smooth things over if they attempt to use the immobilized Russian assets to finance the Kiev regime. Any individuals or funds that agree to purchase such financial instruments will be the first targets for counter-sanctions with far-reaching consequences for their further international activities. It is obvious to the entire international community that the West, which is incapable of producing even some pseudo-legal grounds for its aggressive actions, has never even intended to comply with international law or their national legal norms, for that matter. Their advanced planning and premeditation only give more legitimacy to our potential response. The United States and its satellites, actually being in a pre-bankruptcy state, which can be concluded from their own economic indicators, and trying to sustain their financial and economic systems by increasing debt and appropriating other countries' resources, have the audacity to dictate to the states of the global majority. Any country that is more or less dependent on Western markets, technology, or financial assistance, or that has any assets in Western jurisdictions, runs the risk of losing them if the Anglo-Saxons suddenly need them for another foreign policy project or just to patch up the gaps in their chronically deficit-ridden budgets. It is obvious that building stable trade and financial cooperation with Western players, with their obvious volatility, political bias, and double standards, is a high-risk strategy. Question: Zelensky has said that Russia should attend the Second Peace Summit on Ukraine. What is Moscow's attitude to such statements made in Kiev? Maria Zakharova: First, it is not for Zelensky to decide who should do what, let alone dictate his will to Russia. Overall, I believe that it will be best to disregard that monster's dictates to Russia. Second, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov answered this question at his news conference at the UN headquarters in New York on July 17, 2024. He spoke in detail about the history of the machinations that are presented by the West as peace initiatives, conferences, and forums, which are called Swiss summits now and were called Copenhagen summits before. Third, the Russian authorities have stated many times that Russia does not accept any ultimatums or the Zelensky formula, which is being forced on us. You should keep this in mind when such statements or calls are made in connection with our country. Question: Zelensky said the other day that Russia should attend the Second Peace Summit on Ukraine. Has Russia received an invitation to it? How would you respond? Will Russia agree to attend it, and if so, what will be the level of its representation? Maria Zakharova: I have answered this question just now. Similar questions were asked at Sergei Lavrov's news conference at the UN on July 17. As I said, no ultimatums based on the Zelensky formula are acceptable to us. It is our fundamental position. Question: the German magazine Compact was prohibited after it published its interview with you in its online version on July 13, 2024. What is your attitude to this? Is it possible to speak about democracy and freedom of the media in Europe after that? Maria Zakharova: I would like to point out that when the US political establishment talks about democracy, it invariably means American democracy. All such statements always mention our democracy or American democracy. There is a good reason for. The system which they call democracy has nothing in common with classical democracy or the current democratic foundations. It is an American hybrid system that would be better described as the dictatorship of liberalism. At the beginning of its development, it was probably based on something that was democratic, but it has since turned into liberal dictate, the dictatorship of one ideology. On the one hand, it proclaims freedom as an absolute priority, but on the other hand, it is suppressing the freedom to hold alternative views. This hybrid system does not tolerate legality that ensures law and order. Liberal dictatorship is largely based on chaos that offers conditions for controlling people and the media. They are using a combination of methods for this purpose, acting through financial institutions, manipulating technological opportunities, and the merging of business and political elites, among others. The Western special services, primarily the Anglo-Saxon ones, have an enormous influence on the media sphere. I started speaking about the American system in answer to your question, because Germany is a victim of the American liberal dictatorship's pressure on its domestic policies, and has largely merged with it. Regarding Compact, we are aware of the statements made after German law enforcers raided the magazine's offices. They said that Compact was a right-wing extremist magazine. But it has been right-wing and extremist for a long time, but a decision to ban it was only made within a day of it publishing an interview with an official representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Isn't it a strange coincidence? Another important fact is that the German Interior Ministry's actions against that media outlet were not based on a court ruling or decisions by other German authorities adopted in accordance with laws on the freedom of the media and complying with legal procedures. Taken by a law enforcement body and coordinated with the ruling regime of Chancellor Olaf Scholz, that decision confirmed the fall of the ideals, goals, and objectives proclaimed by the German political machine. And they have the gall to lecture us and other countries on the development of democracy. I don't have precise information about the decision-making mechanism. I believe that the German political system was probably considering the decision for a long time, and that it was only looking for a pretext. Well, the warning light went on when they heard the views expressed in that interview. One of the main questions of interest to German journalists concerned gas supplies, Nord Streams, and the terrorist attack against an exclusively civilian infrastructure project, interaction in energy, and the possibility of resuming gas supplies. When asked about Russia stopping the supplies, we replied that it was a lie. Neither Russia nor the USSR ever stopped supplying energy resources to their partners, in particular to Germany. They asked about the possibility of resuming the supplies and how much time it will take. We stated that one of the Nord Stream pipelines has preserved its technical functions and the supplies may be resumed within several weeks. The key topic was that Russia allegedly prevents the resumption of supplies. This is not true. It is the German government that is preventing them, either of its own free will or at the US gunpoint. Let the German government report to its own citizens. However, this is the information that the Olaf Scholz government is concealing from Germans. The thing is that it was the German Chancellor who said some time ago that Russia had stopped the supplies. Our country supplied gas up to the adoption of the relevant decision by the German side. This is the truth that the forged government cannot cope with. This lie was supported by the recent statement by former UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who lied that Russia allegedly stopped supplies of its energy resources to the European Union countries. This is a lie. To date, we do have examples of our interaction in energy with EU countries. The EU countries do not receive Russian gas solely because they stopped their energy cooperation themselves, in addition to the entire lawlessness with sanctions against our country, blocking of accounts and denial of payments via the available financial institutions, sanctions lists, etc. The totality of all this is the answer to your question. This is only the beginning for Germany. Truth be told, it started long before the closure of the Compact magazine. Please, recall the decision to block Russia Today Deutsch, which was adopted with active involvement of the German government officials, to expel Russian journalists, to hinder their work, endless harassment by the same German journalists at the instigation of law enforcement and political agencies. Such anti-democratic manifestations marked that horrible beginning. The proof is that the decisions with respect of the Compact were not based on any court rulings or legal procedure. These are the questions that German journalists, German public should ask their own government. I find it hard to believe that in a normally functioning democratic society, an executive agency would unilaterally ban a media outlet and conduct searches and raids on its offices without a court approval or concrete evidence. The only historical parallel in Germany would be the Third Reich under Joseph Goebbels, with its harsh system of suppressing dissent. Many German public figures refer to it exactly like that. What is happening in Germany today is nonsense from a legal point of view. This has nothing to do with democracy. What we witness in the West today is a dramatic erosion of the culture of interaction between the state, society, and the media. Aggressive ultraliberalism now reigns supreme in these countries, with the United States leading the way in its approach to journalists and the media. American journalists cannot secure open and full-fledged communication with administration officials. Look at the briefings in the White House. Any inconvenient questions are immediately cut off. Moreover, dialogue is conducted only with select journalists with their planted questions. President Joe Biden's interaction with the media has become a source of mockery. Journalists wonder if he could answer any question in case he ever holds a news conference with independent journalists and genuine media representatives, who are likely to pose difficult questions on current issues. Such events are routine in our country. President Vladimir Putin holds extensive news conferences every year, where he answers all questions for several hours. Every day he speaks publicly, commenting on current issues and gives interviews to both Russian and international journalists. The same applies to members of the Russian government. What is occurring within Germany's political establishment is the erosion of its own independence and sovereignty, yielding to the diktat of the United States. Question: A month ago, permanent representative of Russia to the United Nations Vasily Nebenzia said that debates on cooperation between the UN and the CSTO, CIS, and SCO were very important. According to Mr. Nebenzia, these regional organizations do not always receive proper coverage at the UN. Why? Maria Zakharova, on July 19, New York will host open debates on UN cooperation with the CIS, CSTO, and SCO. This is essential even of Russia's presidency at the UN Security Council. It will be chaired by Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin. We want to stress that consistent work is done at these organizations to boost their potential in various areas, and practical events are held regularly. In particular, we can see good prospects for strengthening cooperation between the UN and its agencies and the CSTO on regional issues, with an emphasis on Afghanistan, as well as for the CSTO to join the UN's peacekeeping activities. Every 2 years, the General Assembly adopts a resolution on cooperation between the CIS and the UN. It highlights the importance of strengthening mutual coordination and encourages the development of ties between the specialized agencies of the UN and the CIS. This year, the draft resolution will be submitted by Russia as a country presiding at the CIS. The SCO's activities are highly praised by the leadership of the UN Secretariat. At the SCO summit held in Astana on July 3–4, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres noted the organization's potential in ensuring peace and stability and advocated further promotion of its ties with the UN. However, there are problems, too, though they should not have arisen due to the fact that the CSTO, CIS, and SCO are key organizations in the Eurasian space responsible for maintaining regional peace and security. In this situation, representatives of the collective West are not ready to recognize their contribution and are doing everything to avoid mentioning them in any connection with the UN. I will give you an example. We have been unable to agree on a Security Council press statement on the activities of the UN Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy for Central Asia, UNRCCA, since 2018. Why? Westerners do not need this. They do everything to block the statement of an obvious fact. The draft statements presented by the Russian side note all possible areas for the activities of the UN Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy for Central Asia, including cooperation with the CIS, CSTO, and SCO. However, Western members of the Council are opposed to mentioning this cooperation, despite its constructive role in preventing conflicts and combating terrorism and drug trafficking, though maintaining contacts with organizations in the region is a key task of the UN Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy for Central Asia. It is clear that such a biased position is dictated by nothing more than a reluctance to recognize the realities on the ground. Question: does the Foreign Ministry or other Russian agencies track and process alternative estimates of casualties in the Gaza Strip, including among civilians and employees of international organizations, such as those affiliated with the UN? What figures of the dead and wounded in Gaza does the Foreign Ministry currently stick to? Maria Zakharova: we rely on the casualty data provided by specialized UN agencies regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Additionally, we consider reports from relevant Israeli and Palestinian authorities, which document the number of dead, wounded, and missing amid the ongoing violence in the Gaza Strip. We take into account these figures in our work, as we have no reason to question the reliability of the UN agency's data. Question: the third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China took place in Beijing from July 15 to 18, marking a significant event for both China and the global community. The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook report forecasts a 5% growth in China's economy for 2024, a revision up by 0.4% from the April estimate. IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas highlighted that emerging Asian economies, particularly China, remain key drivers of global economic growth. In light of this, what opportunities might China offer to other countries by further advancing its unique approach to reform and modernization? Given the current global economic uncertainty and the risk of recession, what potential role could China's economy play in this context? Maria Zakharova: representatives from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China and other relevant institutions are best positioned to discuss the potential of the Chinese economy. We extend our congratulations to our Chinese friends on the successful completion of the third plenary session and the positive outcomes it has produced. We believe the decisions made will further the development and prosperity of friendly China and enhance the well-being of its citizens. From our perspective, we see promising opportunities for continued cooperation. The People's Republic of China stands as a major driver of global economic growth. China's tangible achievements contribute to expanded global trade, heightened cross-border investment, and reinforced international production chains. It is not surprising that analysts worldwide closely monitor China's economic trends and the political decisions made during significant political events in the country. The Russian Federation considers China a close friend and strategic partner, particularly in what regards economic development. We are committed to deepening and broadening our comprehensive practical cooperation with China, which plays an important role in advancing the socio-economic progress of both nations and maintaining stability in the regional and global economy. Question: addressing the UN Security Council, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov noted that Russia was ready to search for a balance of interests, while coordinating agreements to resolve the conflict in Ukraine and to build a new security system in Europe. Did the minister conduct the relevant discussions with the concerned parties on the UN sidelines? Did U.S. representatives ask for a meeting with him? Maria Zakharova: while staying in New York during Russia's July presidency of the UN Security Council, Sergei Lavrov held a number of bilateral meetings with foreign partners. U.S. representatives did not request such meetings, and therefore no contacts took place. Speaking of Western Europe, he met with Hungary's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Peter Zigerto and head of Switzerland's Federal Department of Foreign Affairs Ignazio Casas. The relevant press releases, 1, 2, dealing with the results of the meetings provide the details. Regarding a balance of interests, Sergei Lavrov discussed this in great detail in his remarks. While speaking about the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, he referred to remarks by President of Russia Vladimir Putin at a meeting with the Foreign Ministry's leadership on July 14, 2024. A balance of interests suggested by Russia is a wonderful alternative to ultimatums. Not a single ultimatum, that the collective West uses to build its international policy, has achieved its goal. Many of them became counterproductive for the West itself. The policy of sanctions is an ultimatum that has no legal foundations, and that impacts international law. Although directed against our country, it spelled problems for those who imposed anti-Russia sanctions. There are various kinds of ultimatums. It is necessary to search for an alternative to this policy. Sanctions expand the philosophy of interbloc confrontation. A balance of interests is an alternative, and Russia is ready to present this alternative to everyone who is tired of the aggressive policy of the collective West. This is a wonderful option. Sergei Lavrov discussed the issue of resolving the Ukraine crisis during all his contacts with foreign partners at the UN platform. This happens virtually always, except brief meetings focusing on narrow specialized issues. We have been discussing the situation around Ukraine in its entirety during all talks over the past few years, specifically, in the context of the Minsk agreements, historical facts, the causes of current developments and specific options for resolving the crisis. The minister provides in-depth and expanded assessments in this respect. Question: U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump offered the position of vice president to J.D. Vance, who is known for his opposition to support for Ukraine. How would you assess the chances of a peaceful settlement if the Trump-Vance combination wins? How would you comment on Vance's latest statement that China is a bigger problem for the United States than the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Maria Zakharova: Donald Trump once said that he would settle this issue within 24 hours. And J.D. Vance said that China was a bigger problem for the United States than the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. First, it is necessary to separate election rhetoric from statements made by government officials who are endowed with appropriate powers. Second, when speaking about ways to settle the conflict, we must be realistic. I remember that during the previous race to the White House, the current candidate Donald Trump's team made ambitious statements about settling the situation in the Middle East. It was called the deal of the century. They prepared it for a long time. How did it end? In nothing. A few years later, during Joe Biden's term, a colossal historical tragedy occurred. We have already had experience like this. So, we can apply both points I have mentioned to find the answer to the question regarding the statements of this team aiming at the White House. We must regard both the statements and capabilities realistically. I heard a statement that China was a bigger problem for the United States than everything else. This team has made them repeatedly. It would be right for the US to reach an internal consensus that the dictatorship of liberalism is their biggest problem. This is a fact. If their political parties and movements agree with this, it would be easier for them and for the entire world. Right now, this is the United States' biggest problem. The system that replaced the democratically oriented domestic political machine of the United States has degenerated into a liberal dictatorship. This is the root cause of all ills, both within the United States and abroad. Why? The liberal dictatorship kills democratic principles and destroys the American and international legal foundations that do not suit it either. It also affects U.S. bilateral relations. Although we traditionally do not comment on election campaigns in third countries, there are indeed many questions in this respect. Question: could you comment on the U.S. increasing activities in the South Caucasus, in the republics bordering on Azerbaijan? For example, the preparation of a coup in Georgia, which the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service warned about, the attempt to open a second front against Russia, according to Prime Minister of Georgia Irakli Kobakij, or USAID Administrator Samantha Power's visit to Yerevan. Maria Zakharova, we have commented on this topic repeatedly. The US regards the South Caucasus only as a platform to stage various actions aimed against Russia and the peaceful coexistence of the countries and nations in the region. It is not satisfied with Russia and its capabilities. Why? Because Russia pursues a peaceful policy. The United States is never satisfied with the peaceful policy in general. Achieving peace and stability in the region, which is only possible through a comprehensive normalization of relations between South Caucasian countries with the involvement of their closest neighbors Russia, Iran, and Turkey, is not among Washington's goals and priorities. Rather, Washington's goal is quite the opposite: to make sure that no cooperation, rapprochement, or mutual understanding is reached in the region. Pressuring Tbilisi during the adoption of the law on the transparency of foreign influence is a clear example of the US and European Union's policy of hypocrisy, double standards, and open aggression. Let me remind you that similar laws are already in effect in the US and EU countries. In June, a similar law was adopted in Canada, but neither the US nor the EU had any complaints against Canada, while Georgia and its people were humiliated by the United States and collective Brussels every day during a month. Let me repeat that the United States and a number of other Western countries have far more stringent legal regulations in this regard. We also see Washington's attempts to heat up the situation in Georgia in the run-up to the parliamentary election in October. All of this can be applied to Azerbaijan and Armenia, too. We can see how American officials are now traveling to Yerevan non-stop. They are trying to create an illusion that they care about the welfare of post-Soviet countries. In fact, these countries are being drawn into the implementation of US anti-Russia plans that are detrimental not so much to Russia but to the countries in the region. We hope that our partners in the South Caucasus understand the worth of friendship with the West. The West cannot make friends, it can only make use of friends. It cannot care less for its partners' feelings. Question: on July 21 to 22, we will mark the 80th anniversary of establishing diplomatic relations between Russia and Syria. What do you think about prospects for developing relations between our countries in the next decade? Maria Zakharova, diplomatic relations with Syria were established on July 21, 1944, and the countries exchanged embassies in 1946. Russia and Syria traditionally maintain friendly ties. Moscow played an important role in completely decolonizing the Syrian Arab Republic. In February 1946, the Soviet side used its veto right in support of Damascus for the first time in the work of the UN Security Council and made it impossible to unjustifiably delay the process of withdrawing British and French troops from Syria. Our country's economic and technical assistance made it possible to build over 80 major facilities in Syria, to lay about 2,000 kilometers of railway tracks and 3,700 kilometers of power transmission lines. Efforts to boost the defense capability of Syria became a highly important aspect of bilateral collaboration. Tens of thousands of Syrian citizens graduated from our country's universities. Russian-Syrian relations became particularly dynamic over the last 40 to 50 years. During that period, they developed consistently and grew stronger based on mutual respect and consideration for each other's interests. Our country resolutely supported the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic amid attempts by the collective West to drag it into a destructive geopolitical project, contrary to the will of the legitimate government and the people, and it assisted Syria in the existential clash with international terrorism. Due to the support of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in 2015 to 2017, Damascus managed to regain control over most of its territory. Today, Russia plays an important role in facilitating a comprehensive settlement in this country, including within the framework of the Astana format. Moscow and Damascus share the need for building a new and equitable world order based on the principle of sovereign equality of states. They are committed to forging a new security system on the Eurasian continent. The Syrian leadership firmly supports Russia's special military operation in Ukraine and solidarizes with us at the UN and other multilateral platforms. We are satisfied with the advanced nature of Russian-Syrian political dialogue and our productive collaboration on all issues of mutual interest. We are convinced that multifaceted cooperation between Russia and Syria will continue to develop consistently, including trade and economic cooperation, contacts in the cultural, humanitarian, scientific, and educational areas. Allow me to use this opportunity and to congratulate our Syrian friends and colleagues on our common holiday. I would like to wish them well-being, prosperity, peace and security, considering the extremely difficult road that the people of Syria have traveled, especially in recent years. They have coped with this and overcome all the hardships. They deserve all the best and a divine blessing. Question: why, do you think, is the United States focused so intensely on Armenia? Top U.S. diplomats, including Under-Secretary for Civilian Security, Democracy and Human Rights Yusra Zaya, Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs James O'Brien, and Administrator of USAID Samantha Power, visited Yerevan in recent weeks. Maria Zakharova: I shared my comment on that particular subject on an earlier occasion. Obviously, the United States and the EU are seeking to gain a foothold in the region at the cost of the interests of Russia, Iran, and Turkey, which are traditional partners and neighbors of the South Caucasus countries. It appears they are successful in doing so in Armenia. Yerevan chose to build up cooperation with NATO. It participated in the NATO summit in Washington. They hold joint military exercises, such as the US-Armenia Eagle Partner exercise currently underway in Armenia. This is regretful and causes concern for Armenia's future. As economic departments of NATO, the US and the EU have repeatedly pulled similar tricks in many other countries. Everyone is aware of how these Eagle partnerships end: they will use them and throw away. By deepening cooperation with the actors whose goal is to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, Yerevan is running a risk of seriously destabilizing the situation in the South Caucasus to the detriment of its own security. Question: Baku is hosting the first Congress of Movements for Independence of the territories colonized by France, including New Caledonia. A number of experts expressed hope that Moscow will stand with the participants of the forum. Is there a chance Russia will ever hold events to promote combating modern-day neocolonialism? Maria Zakharova: we are quite active in this department. Our parliament is engaged in this matter. Parliamentary diplomacy has recently held a large number of diverse events on this track. Our diplomats have put forward initiatives and made statements at the United Nations. This issue is among our priorities not only because it is part of historical realities, but also because it is important to preserve knowledge of the past. Colonialism is gaining momentum and has established a foothold at the modern technological level in the form of neocolonialism. Modern capabilities in various spheres make it possible for it to use a multitude of modified covers to pursue same-old colonial policies. This topic is of the utmost urgency for Russia's foreign policy and its activities in the international arena. Question: Hamas made it clear it was receptive of the latest proposal for a ceasefire and exchange of prisoners in the Gaza Strip. However, the Israeli side put forward new terms and conditions which broke the deal, and ceasefire was not agreed upon. Why do you think a ceasefire in Gaza fell through despite the mediation efforts of the US-led West? Does US support for Israel have anything to do with that? Maria Zakharova: the Russian Federation is not involved in the efforts of international mediators, Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, that are promoting an agreement between Israel and Hamas. The regional players are reportedly committed to acting as an honest broker and are doing their best to act as such. With regard to the reasons that are in the way of achieving mutually acceptable agreements that should eventually lead to a long-awaited ceasefire, this question is better directed at representatives of the opposing parties. Let them share their insights. The Security Council met yesterday to review this issue. We have been deploying considerable efforts since the day the crisis started escalating. We provided our assessments regarding not only the causes of this historic drama, but also the avenues that could lead to normalization overall, or at least to break the deadlock. I would like to once again draw your attention to yesterday's statement by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov during an open meeting of the United Nations Security Council on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. Question: US Armenian military exercises kicked off in Yerevan this week against the backdrop of anti-Russia rhetoric by Armenian officials. Where does Moscow stand on the US military activity in the South Caucasus? Do these actions pose a threat to the stability and security of the region? Maria Zakharova: I just commented on it. This is the second time these exercises are conducted, which fact causes nothing but regret and concern, especially with Yerevan actually freezing its participation in the CSTO and engaging in public attacks on the organization. None of the pseudo-peaceful and peacemaking efforts declared by the Westerners are truly that. Clearly, their main goal is to create a springboard for implementing their own geopolitical projects. To get there, they need to reverse all existing peaceful developments that have been gaining momentum in that part of the world, to pit the countries of the region against each other, and to thwart the political plans declared by Baku and Yerevan, which enjoy the support of the countries of the region. They also need to head off economic consolidation of the infrastructure projects that were started to support this political will. The Americans and other NATO members went there in order to disrupt the fragile, truly fragile, balance. I was tempted to say peace after fragile, but what the Westerners are doing will result in peace turning into a fragile truce, which will subsequently fall apart. The fact that the Americans made an appearance in the South Caucasus, we had the chance to see similar developments on many occasions in various parts of the world, will fuel the conflict potential in the region and create new dividing lines and hotbeds of shooting conflicts. Westerners are obsessed about dragging Armenia into various formats of interaction in and around the South Caucasus that are primarily directed against Russia, Iran, and Turkey. By embroiling Armenia in military exercises and training programs that they sponsor, they impose NATO standards on the Republic's armed forces, which will ultimately lead to reformatting Armenia's entire security system and, as a consequence, the Westerners acquiring more levers of influence on its domestic and foreign policy. Russia remains committed to its allied obligations, including ensuring Armenia's security, and strives to come up with mutually acceptable solutions. Actually, the question is whether Armenia is committed to its allied obligations. Such steps by Yerevan have become systematic and undermine prospects for the proper functioning of existing interaction mechanisms in this sphere. This is diplomatic language, but I'm sure we got our message across. Question: in the run-up to the BRICS summit in Kazan, scheduled for this autumn, more and more is being said about the need to create a common information space for the BRICS member states. In particular, following the BRICS Parliamentary Forum held in St. Petersburg a week ago, there has been increasing advocacy for expanding practical interaction between the media in the BRICS Plus format. Does the Russian Foreign Ministry plan to promote the integration of this issue into the autumn summit agenda, or to initiate relevant talks at the high and highest levels in Kazan? Maria Zakharova: in the context of the aggressive hybrid war and information attacks on Russia and other countries on the part of the collective West, which have become a system-wide phenomenon, expanding media cooperation among the global majority, including through the national media, is becoming more relevant than ever. In fact, such interaction is in place now, including bilateral projects as well as various collective formats, such as BRICS, the SCO, and other international platforms. It is clear to everyone that such threats are best addressed together. Combining individual capabilities is always more effective. The relevant possibilities are being discussed at various levels and in various formats, including during the events held as part of Russia's BRICS chairmanship, themed Strengthening Multilateralism for Equitable Global Development and Security. The key highlights include creating the BRICS information space, which would provide the audiences in our countries with access to unbiased high-quality information and protect them from misinformation. It should be noted that this is not an artificial attempt to juxtapose us and them, but an objective process that stems from the new realities and reflects the ongoing profound transformation of the global politics and economy. Incidentally, the common BRICS information space issue was among the subjects of an extensive discussion during the consultations between heads of information agencies of the BRICS countries' foreign policy departments, which took place in Moscow on July 12. The 10 partners are extremely interested in closer coordination to create a secure BRICS media landscape. This will definitely facilitate the development of reliable collective mechanisms to counter Western attempts to discredit the activities of BRICS and its members in the eyes of the world. Question: do you think that Russia-Portugal relations have remained unchanged over the past 6 months, with no chance of improvement yet? Maria Zakharova: I already answered a similar question from your agency at a briefing on May 15. Unfortunately, we have seen no change since May 15, or over the past months and even years. Russia-Portugal relations have been on a downslide ever since the start of the special military operation, due to the hostile approach taken by the Portuguese authorities. However, we continue to believe that at some stage, better sooner than later, a realistic assessment of events will prevail in Portugal and some rational conclusions will be drawn after giving some thought to hard facts. They will definitely come to realize that mutually beneficial and respectful ties between our countries need to be cherished and fostered. They will, once they start reading and perceiving actual facts, not just the handbooks that come from Brussels or Washington, or falsehoods distributed at NATO summits as mainstream narratives. It is of the essence to be familiar with the facts, with the real state of affairs, the historical background, and the processes taking place in reality, rather than be guided by some perverse solidarity idea that Washington is imposing on NATO member countries. Question: how do you think the results of the latest European elections might influence Russia's foreign policy? Maria Zakharova: I believe that Russia's foreign policy primarily depends on our own national elections. Elections to the European Parliament, elections within Europe, or any other elections in the countries of the European Union are more likely to influence the foreign policies of those specific countries rather than directly affect our foreign policy. That is how I see the connection. If the foreign policies of EU countries begin to reflect a more realistic and sensible perception of reality, we will assess these changes and adjust our approaches accordingly. However, if the demonization of our country persists, accompanied by Russophobic attitudes, sanctions, ultimatums, intimidation, and the escalation of current or future conflicts, we will have no reason to revise our foreign policy in these areas. This is, after all, the behavior we are currently witnessing from the West. The most crucial step for Western European countries is to confront reality directly, which would mean looking beyond the rhetoric of EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Josep Borrell and the repetitive statements by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, as well as stepping away from campaign materials produced by the US Department of State and the White House. EU leaders should look out the windows of their own offices and observe the daily lives of their citizens. They should visit local stores, engage with the population, and consult public organizations to understand the real issues people are facing. This could be a valuable starting point for the EU countries. They are eager to address issues in Ukraine, which have no direct impact on EU citizens. Moreover, problems in Ukraine, which were largely created by the collective West, have now become concerns for EU citizens. Yet, it is striking to see EU countries feel entitled to resolve matters related to Ukraine while they are slow to tackle their own domestic issues. These include challenges related to migration, a horrific rise in crime, financial crises, stagnating economic growth, and even negative trends in the economic and financial sectors. These are major political crises, which are not merely a matter of political parties or leaders coming and going. They are taking place due to severe societal polarization and a disconnect between stated political goals and actual conditions. Western European countries need to address these issues directly. To do so, they must remove their metaphorical 3D glasses, look out the window, and engage with their citizens. Question: the government of Pakistan is considering banning Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, the political party of former and now imprisoned Prime Minister Imran Khan. How do you assess this development? Maria Zakharova: we saw the news that appeared on July 15 that the government of Pakistan was going to ban the activities of Tehreek-e-Insaf, or Movement for Justice, the former Prime Minister's popular political party. We believe this is a purely internal matter of Pakistan. Russia does not interfere in the internal political life of sovereign states. Relations between our countries are developing dynamically. We reaffirm our readiness to continue building diverse cooperation with Islamabad in the spirit of mutual respect and in accordance with the norms of international law. Our interaction experience is the best proof of this. Question: The Federal District Court in Florida dismissed the case against former U.S. President Donald Trump for improper handling of classified documents. What is the reaction of the Russian Foreign Ministry? Maria Zakharova: This is yet another sign that the American system is in a deep crisis. During many years and even decades, the American administration, both Democrats and Republicans, has been claiming that it is impossible to exert administrative influence on the work of law enforcement and judicial bodies. This was a reason for Washington not only to criticize independent countries and sovereign states, but also impose sanctions against them. We can see the sheer legal incapacity of the American system, when one thing is declared while something entirely different is taking place. Over the past few years, many Americans themselves have said that something chaotic and absurd is happening. On the one hand, they declare democracy and democratic principles as the major achievement in the American history, and on the other hand, there is an increasing deviation from democratic principles. I am not even going to comment on this particular case, there are plenty of similar ones. The situation you have mentioned is very prominent because we can see a range of absurd and contradictory statements and actions. But this happens all the time. As an example, at a meeting of the UN Security Council yesterday, we heard representatives of the US, Great Britain and France say that international law must not be violated by occupying and attacking sovereign states. This is said by the states that have occupied and attacked a considerable number of countries over the past 2 decades, such as Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, and Serbia. At the Security Council, they declare things that they themselves fail to do or do exactly the opposite. Such examples are plentiful. This indicates a crisis of the system in the United States as well as in the West as a whole, a crisis of liberal democracy and the onset of a period of liberal dictatorship, which manifests itself in such an atrocious way.